enabled the industrial production line. The third was the computer, mainframes, minis, PCs, the internet, the web, the mobile web, social media, the cloud, big data. And now technology is infusing itself throughout everything, throughout every business process, throughout every organization, throughout the physical world, and into our bodies. And we have these extraordinary technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence, where computers do things that they weren't programmed to do because they learn to do new things. Now my view, and my son Alex's view, is that the most important of all of these technologies, insofar as they will participate in the economy, is the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies, blockchain. Let me ask you, put up your hand please in one of these four categories. Number one, what's a blockchain? Number two, I know a little bit, I wouldn't come up here and explain it. Number three, I know a lot. Number four, this is my world, okay? Number one, what's a blockchain? Hands? Okay. Number two, I know a little bit. Number three, I'm an expert. Number four, this is my world. This is his world, Carl's world, and her world.
Only you.
This is Carl from the Blockchain Institute Brazil, and that's Daria from the Blockchain Institute in Toronto. Okay, so most of you are fairly new to this topic, so let me explain it to you. What this is the second era of the internet. For 40 years, we've had the internet of information. But when I send you some information, a PDF, a PowerPoint, an email, I'm actually sending you a copy. Even with a website, I keep the original. And that works fine for information. But when it comes to things that really matter for the Brazilian economy, assets, things of value that belong to somebody, things like money, or stocks, or bonds, or contracts, or loyalty points, or intellectual property, cultural assets like art or music, votes, it's an asset. It's something of value that belongs to somebody. Carbon credits, our identities. Sending a copy of those is a terrible idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you a million reais, it's really important that I don't still have the money and that I can send it to you and to you and to you. So cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for a long time. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy and establish trust to deal with assets is through middlemen, banks, governments, credit card companies, social media companies. And they provide all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the party, you are who you are, this is Raphael. They identify the asset, that's $1. They clear and settle transactions, and they keep records. And overall, they've done a pretty good job. But there are growing problems. We really began to notice this in 2008. Where were you in September 14th in 2008 when the financial system crashed? I'll tell you where I was. I was in Vienna on the stage of the biggest congress of bankers in the world. It's called SIBOS. I had 9,000 bankers in the audience, and they were all 2 days earlier, Lehman Brothers had crashed. And all these bankers were in a fetal position on their chairs. And I gave them my views about what was wrong with the financial industry. Now back then the solutions were fairly limited. But think about it. Here's an industry, it excludes $2 billion people from participation in the economy, won't give them a bank account. It slows things down, takes a second for an email to go around the world. It can take days or even weeks for digital assets to move down Wall Street in computers. They charge too much. People in Toronto that are part of the Brazilian diaspora that send money back home to their parents in Sao Paulo can be charged 10 to 20%. You ever heard of cross-border email charges? It's kind of the same thing, isn't it? It's not a lot more complicated. The biggest problem is that they capture our data. You create this data. This is the new oil of the digital age. You create it, they get to keep it. So you can't use it to plan your life, you can't monetize it, and our privacy is being undermined. So, what if there were not just an internet of information, what if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast, global, distributed ledger where anything of value, from money to votes to music, could be managed, transacted in a secure and private way. What if there were a native digital medium for value? Well, this is where Bitcoin comes in. 2008, an anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper. And he solved the double spend problem. He found a way that people could do transactions peer-to-peer without an intermediary. And trust is not achieved by a middleman, it's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code. Which is why Alex and I call it the trust protocol. Trust is built into the network. You can't cheat somebody. So you trust them. So don't be confused by Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin is an app on blockchain. Email was the first big app of the Internet of Information, right? Bitcoin is the first big app of the Internet of Value. And Bitcoin is an asset. It's part of a new asset class, and it goes up and down in value. It's been going up a lot. I'm sure everyone here wishes they bought some Bitcoin. But it's more broadly, it's a cryptocurrency that's not controlled by a nation state. It's not a fiat currency like the reais or the dollar or the pound. And that has some interesting use cases if you are in a country where there's restrictions over capital flow or you have a volatile currency and so on. But the real opportunity here is none of that. The real opportunity is this underlying blockchain technology. For the first time ever, people can transact and trust each other peer-to-peer. Now at this point, most of you put up your hands in category 1 and category 2. So you're probably wondering, just a second, how is that possible? How can you trust somebody without an intermediary? How can my son, who's an engineer in Toronto, send money from his mobile device directly to my mobile device and there's no bank? So I'm going to explain how this works. Now there's an American author named Mark Twain, and he says, "I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short letter." So it's taken me 4 years to be able to describe this in 2.5 minutes, okay? So turn on your timers. Here we go, 2.5 minutes. I'm going to explain to you how blockchain works. Now the one I'm going to pick is Bitcoin, because it was the first one, but it's only the first. Are you ready? Here we go. That million reais that I sent is broadcast out to a global network of millions of computers, all using the highest level of cryptography. And all around the world, there's a group of people called miners, like gold miners. And they have massive computing power, estimated to be 20 to 50 times bigger than Google. It's the biggest computing resource in the world. And these miners do a lot of work with these computers to find out the truth. And every 10 minutes, sort of like the heartbeat of a network, a block gets created. And that block contains all the transactions from the last 10 minutes, that I sent 1 million reais. Or it could be that somebody got married, or somebody registered a land title, or that some light bulb bought some power from a solar panel across the street. Theoretically, any transaction. And then the miners use this computing power to validate the block. And the first miners to win get paid some of the cryptocurrency from that blockchain, in this case, Bitcoin. And then, and this is the important part, that block gets connected to the previous block and the previous block to create a chain of blocks. And if I wanted to hack that block and take that million Reyes and send it to you and to you to commit fraud, to double spend, I'd have to hack that block plus the previous block because they're connected with a digital wax seal. I'd have to hack the entire history of commerce on that blockchain, not just on one computer, but across millions of computers simultaneously, while the most powerful computing resource in the world is watching me. That's going to be tough to do. I won't say it's unhackable, but this is a way more secure computing platform than you have in your company today. I like to think of it, this blockchain, it's a highly processed thing. What's highly processed? Like a chicken McNugget from McDonald's, okay? Highly processed. It would be like turning that chicken McNugget back into a chicken to hack that. Now someday someone will be able to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, but for now, this is going to be very difficult to do. Blockchain. Bitcoin was the first one. Who's heard of Hyperledger? Hands, please. Hardly anybody. Okay. Hyperledger comes from the Linux Foundation, and it's a platform for building blockchains for big enterprises. It's industrial strength. There are 150 companies involved, and IBM is one of the big companies driving this. Then we have Ethereum. Who's heard of Ethereum? Okay. Ethereum was developed by a 19-year-old University of Waterloo, Canada dropout. And when we wrote Blockchain Revolution, it was kind of his science experiment. Today it's worth over 100 billion US dollars. But Ethereum's interesting not because of its value. It's interesting because it's a general purpose platform for building applications. Kind of like the web was a general purpose platform for building applications on the Internet of Information. And today on Ethereum are dozens and dozens of projects, any one of them that would completely revolutionize an industry. A project to make a distributed electrical power grid. A project to take double entry accounting, it's been around for 400 years, and turn it into triple entry accounting so you automatically get a third entry on the blockchain and you have a real-time balance. Anyone here from Ernst & Young, KPMG, any of these accounting companies? The audit business is a third of these companies' business, and over time it will decline. And I talk to the CEOs of these companies, they're fine with that because it's not a very good business. It's commodity type business. Quorum is a proprietary implementation of Ethereum by JP Morgan. R3 has a platform called Corda. This is 120 banks that are cooperating together to create a whole new platform for the financial services industry. Ripple is now the second most valuable blockchain. I don't know the current value, but it was like $150 billion not very long ago. Then we have really interesting things like Cosmos. It's an internet of blockchains that will enable them all to exchange data and to communicate. Do you remember with the Internet of Information, we had intranets and nothing communicated? And then eventually we had a publicly available internet that linked all of these networks together. That's what that could be. Icon, company in Korea. I was just there 2 weeks ago. And an extraordinary company building a whole bunch of new platforms for many industries. Metronome, the first cross-blockchain cryptocurrency. So this crypto works and will work across any blockchain. So, the hype cycle has begun. This is 1995 all over again. The Economist did a cover story on blockchain. They called it the trust machine. They said it's the great chain of being sure about things. A friend of mine named Michael Casey has a book coming out next month called The Truth Machine. So, is there a lot of hype? You bet. This is 1995. There was a lot of hype back then, too. But you know something? We talk about the internet today more than we did in 1995. So, yes, today there's a lot of hype, and it's just beginning. We're in the very early days of a very profound change. So, Alex, my son, who's an investment banker, we teamed up several years ago, started doing some research, and we wrote the book, Blockchain Revolution. And I'm very pleased to say it was translated. One of the first translations was in Brazil, into Portuguese. And our publisher in Brazil wasn't a publisher. It was a collective of 50 people who crowdsourced the translation. And when we sell books, they get paid a little tiny bit in Bitcoin. It's an extraordinary collaboration. So, who here has a copy of the book? Hands, please. Okay. Thank you. He's waving the book. Who here is dying to go and buy many, many, many copies of this book? Thank you. Okay. You are a very wise audience. The way to buy this book is in volume, large numbers. You have friends. Christmas is not far away, right? Okay.
Have bulk discounts.
Bulk discounts. Okay, so the other thing we did is we launched the Blockchain Research Institute. This is the world's leading think tank about blockchain. It's based in Canada. We now have an office in Sao Paulo. And the Vice Governor of Sao Paulo and I signed the Blockchain Research Institute Act. And we had a big signing and flags and everything to make this work available here in Sao Paulo. So, why should you care? All right, I know it's late in the afternoon, but I want to give you a little bit of economics because I think the corporation as we know it will be unrecognizable in about a decade. So let me try and defend that statement. 80 years ago, a Nobel Prize winning economist named Ronald Coase wrote a paper, and he asked a very simple question. Why do we have corporations? Why does the firm exist? If Adam Smith is right, the open market is the best mechanism for allocating assets and people and money, information. Why do we all work for companies? Why aren't we independent contractors at every step along the way in production? And he said the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. Now he had 4 types. The cost of search. Imagine trying to find all of the right assets or people in an open market, money. So we bring that inside the boundaries of a corporation where we have filing cabinets to find information, org charts to find people. Secondly, the cost of coordination. Imagine you want to create an automobile company. Imagine the cost of coordinating all these people who've never met to come together and make a car. Prohibitive. Bring that inside the boundaries of a company. Thirdly, the cost of contracting. If every little activity in the economy were a contract, that'd be prohibitive. A doctor is going to perform surgery, and she would have to do 80 contracts with suppliers of scalpels and medications and nurses and operating theaters and furniture, and that would be prohibitive. And finally, the cost of establishing trust. So the industrial age corporation was called vertically integrated. It did everything. Henry Ford, inside the boundaries of the Ford Motor Company, was a power plant, a steel mill, a shipping company. He had a mahogany forest in Honduras to get the wood for his car. Why? For the dashboard. Why? because the cost of transactions in an open market were greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of Ford. So some of you may remember, 1992, I wrote a book called Paradigm Shift, and I said, I think information technology is making the boundaries of the firm more porous. We call it the extended enterprise. Then you had the rise of the Internet of Information. This is a 20-year-old diagram of the Cisco business ecosystem that we drew. Cisco unbundled. Our poem back then was focus on what you do best, partner to do the rest. Now it's not exactly Gabriel Garcia Marquez or something like that, but it's that was the poem. Now what's going to happen with blockchain? That was the Internet of Information. Now those transaction costs are going to drop so fast that peers can come together and create value, and corporations are going to become much more decentralized, and they're going to look more like networks. Now, if you think that's kind of futuristic, let me give you an example. In the book, every book needs a 2x2 matrix, okay? And in the book, we categorize companies according to low to high automation and low to high complexity. So you have things like smart contracts. It's not very complex, and it's not very highly automated. They're basically contracts that self-execute. It's a contract with a software lawyer, a software bank, and a software government inside the contract. Autonomous agents, this is artificial intelligence. This is more complicated. Now, you put all this together in the upper right, we said, how far could this go? Would it be possible to have a company that had no people? No CEO, no management, no people. And we talked about it. We figured here's how it would work. It could raise money in a crowdfunding. And then we almost didn't publish it because we thought people will think we're too futuristic. You know the expression in English, there's a fine line between vision and hallucination. Okay? But we decided we're going to publish it. A week after the book came out, an organization was launched called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. It had no CEO, no management, and no people. It was a venture capital company. And its goal was to raise money and invest in blockchain startups. In 3 weeks, the DAO raised 164 million US dollars. Company with no people raised $164 million through a crowdfunding campaign and smart contracts. Now, it's not a happy ending, okay? Because there was a coding error in the smart contract facility that enabled a hacker to get in there and to take $50 million and move it to an area where after 28 days the hacker could get it out. And he said, I'm not a hacker, I'm just abiding by the terms of the smart contract. So in the end, the creators of this organization with no people decided to give the money back to all the investors. But this is a big deal. Think about it. This happened a week after the book came out. 18 months ago, 20 months ago. You know Bob Dylan, the singer Bob Dylan? He's got a song, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. This is the beginning of a profound change in the deep structure and architecture of the firm. A deep change in how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services. And companies in Brazil that figure this out will have a competitive advantage. So I'd like to end giving you a very quick tour through some blockchain business models. How could you apply these to your business? Number one, we call them cooperatives. You know, people talk about Uber and Airbnb as the sharing economy. I always laugh when I hear that, because the reason they're successful is precisely because they don't share. They aggregate services and sell them. That's created a $75 billion corporation called Uber. Well, what if, say, Airbnb were a distributed application and some smart contracts on a blockchain? How would that work? Yeah. You mean you're going to, you want to go to Rio, and you look at your mobile device, and it's a blockchain is a database. So it lists all the properties that are available. And then there's one that's 5-star rated. It's going to be an apartment. It's close to the beach, safe area. And
Impossible.
it's an oxymoron, right? It's like jumbo shrimp or scented deodorant. An oxymoron is a contradiction in terms. Okay? It's like safe sex. Okay? There's no such thing. Anyway, sorry. I know Rio has security problems, but anyway, you book this place, and then you show up at the door. You key in the number. The door opens. A partial payment goes to the owner of the apartment. You use the place. You watch some movie on the television, other payments, smart contract takes care of that. You leave, you shut the door, the full payment is made, then you go and you rate it 5-star. Loved it, great place, and that's on a blockchain, and nobody can mess with that. Unless you can turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, okay? So all of that was handled by software. You don't actually need a company. So that means that Airbnb owners, we'll call it B Airbnb, blockchain Airbnb. You own an apartment, a couch, you become a cooperative rather than the customers of a company that's taking 20% of all the revenue. Rather than Uber, we have super Uber. we called it that in the book. Okay, number 2. There are all these people in the economy in Brazil that create value but are not fairly compensated for it. So people like journalists, musicians, songwriters, scientists. And I'm going to use the example of the music industry. Do you know the Internet of Information broke our intellectual property regime around these assets? Because we didn't have an Internet of value that protected the rights of the owner. So we copied things, right? You sent out MP3 files to all of your friends. If you're a songwriter 35 years ago in the United States and you wrote a platinum song, 1 million singles, your royalties would be $46,000. Today, you write a song that gets 1 million streams, you don't get $46,000, you get $35. Will that cover the cost of a feijoada or something? It won't get you to the airport. So we need to fix this. So Imogen Heap is a collaborator of ours, the British singer-songwriter, Grammy-winning. She is one of the people creating a new music platform on a blockchain. Here's how it works. She posts her song, and it's inside a smart contract on the blockchain, and the contract protects her intellectual property rights. You want to listen to the song, maybe it's free, or maybe a few microcents. You want to put the song in your movie, that's different. What do you want? The theme song? You want somebody singing it? You want a background music? And the contract collects the money and sends it back to the artist. The way she describes it is my song becomes a business. And it's out there working for me and protecting my interests. Number 3, you know the term disintermediation? Mm-hmm. It means if you're in the middle, you're gonna disappear. Mm-hmm. Now there's another thing though, called re-intermediation. That's the opportunity to create new value in the middle. So, here's a company that will be disintermediated, and I'll give you an example of a re-intermediator. Annalie Domingo is a housekeeper in Toronto. And for 22 years, she takes her paycheck, gets on the bus, gets on the subway, cashes the check, goes back on the bus, goes to the Western Union office in the Filipino Mall. And This office deals with remittances. Do you know this term, remittances? This is the biggest flow of money from the developed world to the developing world. It's bigger than all foreign aid. It's people who left their ancestral land, like Brazil, and they send money back home. This is almost $1 trillion a year. So Annalise sends $500 a month. That's how much she saves to her mom. And it takes her 4 to 7 days. She gets charged 10%. Over a year ago, Annalise Domingo used a tool. It wasn't this one. This is a hot new one called Paycase for remittances. And she sent $500 from her mobile directly to her mother's mobile. It didn't take 7 days, it took 7 minutes. And then her mother looks at her mobile, it looks like Uber. There are cars driving. These cars are tellers. And she sees a 5-star teller, he's 6 minutes away. She clicks on that, the guy shows up, knocks on her door, gives her Filipino pesos that she sticks in her purse. So that's called re-intermediation. If you're in the middle, you have the name agent, broker, lawyer, intermediary, any kind of thing like that. You need to find new ways to create value. Number 4, the global supply chain industry is $64 trillion. It's a big industry. And all of that is going to move to blockchain. Check out this company. It's called Sweetbridge. It's trying to revolutionize a $64 trillion industry. And I love this company. In fact, so much, I rarely become involved with a company, full disclosure. I'm now an advisor to this company. And what it enables you to do is to monetize your own supply chain. So you can borrow money from yourself with your own supply chain as security to pay your suppliers immediately rather than waiting 60 days when you have the cash flow. That's one of a whole bunch of things that can be done. Walmart is using blockchain for food safety. So you have a problem in a supermarket, you can track, scan it, you can track through, because that's what blockchains do. They know the provenance, the history of everything. Right back to the animal. What did the animal eat? Where was the animal fed? What antibiotics and so on. Biggest supply chain in the world, Foxconn, is using, now moving towards blockchain. Conflict diamonds, huge problem, caused deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. It's pretty much been eliminated now because diamonds can be tracked on a blockchain. Number 5, we're almost there. The physical world is becoming smart and interconnected. It's called the Internet of Things. Now this started with the Internet of Information. As we have chips everywhere, and they're connected. So my hotel room here in Sao Paulo, the door has a chip in it, and it's got an IP address. It's connected to the internet. I had a camera stolen from a hotel room in Miami, and the door knew about me. The door knew that who'd been in and out of the room, and we found an unauthorized access. Now some of this is crazy. I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address, and all these devices talk to each other. I have no idea what his refrigerator says to his toaster, but apparently they're friends, you know? They have very meaningful conversations. Maybe more than a friendship, actually, I don't know. But he was bragging to me that his fence around his house talks to his sprinkler system. And I was like, well, why would you care? And he says, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense, you know, to fight off the burglar. So this is trillions, soon, trillions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. When that light bulb buys some power from a distributed power grid in Sao Paulo, And because it pays for the power, its reputation as a trustworthy device is enhanced. All of that's not going to be done by Visa, trust me. The Internet of Things will need a ledger of things for that to occur. So you look at something like, this is how the power grid works in Sao Paulo. Sure, you have some solar panels, but fundamentally it's a big centralized thing. And during Hurricane Sandy in New York, Con Ed got flooded, and where my daughter was living, the power went out for 15 days. Well, we're moving towards a distributed power grid. And you can see that in something like Brooklyn Microgrid, brought to you by a company called LO3. And your device on your roof generates electricity and it sells it into the distributed grid and creates a market for electricity. Number 6, there are all these new platforms emerging. Now this is very interesting. First of all, we'll start with financial services. Does anyone, this is called a machine. Does anyone know the name of this machine? It has a name. Yeah, you wouldn't. It's called a Rube Goldberg machine. Rube Goldberg was an American inventor, and he invented all these crazy complicated machines that did something really simple like crack an egg or open a door. Well, I look at that, I see the banking system. That's the banking system, okay? You buy a caipirinha in the bar and a bunch of messages go through 6 companies, and then 3 days later, a clearing and settlement occurs and somebody gets paid. That's how trust gets established. Imagine if that was all on a distributed ledger. There would be no 3-day settlement period because the payment and the settlement's the same activity. It's just a change in the database. So I'm not going to go through this today, but this is chapter 2 of the book. I didn't write it. It's brilliant. It was written by my son. But he's described what is it overall that the financial services industry does. And then he goes through and he explains how every one of these can be eliminated by a distributed ledger. But more to the point, how if you use this technology, as in the caipirinha example, you can achieve all kinds of huge benefits. So we made some statements, in 10 years, the financial industry may be unrecognizable. In 5 years, venture capital will be turned on its head. You know what? We were conservative. Think about investment banking. It starts with venture capital, investment banking, there's hedge funds, mutual funds, and so on. Last year, more money was raised through crowd-funded blockchain campaigns called ICOs, initial coin offerings, than all venture capital in the world, $3 billion. This is the best thing to ever happen for Brazil entrepreneurs. I've been coming to Brazil for 30 years, and I meet with these entrepreneurs, and every one of them is, I'm trying to find a way to raise money, it's so hard, there's not good angel investments, there's not good venture, and so on. Well, you now have a whole new vehicle to raise this money. Even Dilbert. Do you have Dilbert here in Sao Paulo? Dilbert says to his manager, maybe we should do an initial coin offering, or ICO. And the manager says, what's that? Dilbert says, it's a non-equity process for raising capital that uses a custom cryptocurrency and the blockchain. And the manager says, so it's like a chain made out of coins? Dilbert says, I think I might be wasting my time here. But everybody's talking about this. Now, one of the big groups talking about it are regulators. And some of these are huge. Raising $100 million, $200 million. Like, this is real money now. This is what investment banking is, not just venture capital. Here's one based in Brazil. It's called the Swapi Network. Do you know this? Swapi? Another company I like a lot. They're enabling crowd-funded lending and debt, so people can borrow money who can't get access through traditional instruments. So, is there anyone here from the Brazilian government? Any regulators?
No.
Okay. Would you come up on stage? No, I'm just kidding. There is a public interest here. We do need good regulation, but it's got to be sensible. And countries like China and now Korea have banned ICOs. This is like you have a patient on the operating table and you need to do microsurgery, and the tool you use is a chainsaw. You don't need to ban ICOs. Basically, 100 years ago in Britain, the automobile was appearing, and the British government launched something called the Red Flag Law. If you had an automobile, you had to have a driver, a navigator, and someone up front with a red flag so that you wouldn't scare the horses. You wouldn't scare the horses. This hurt the development of the British automobile industry. So every country in the world, including Brazil, is about to have its red flag moment. Are you going to go down road number one that means sensible regulation and a powerful tool to build a new innovation economy? Or are you going to go down road number two with a chainsaw and cut the patient in half? I would recommend road number one as a better route. So we can talk about, there's some details about what that regulation should look like. I'm not going to get into it. So there's all these amazing new companies now that are building platforms. Okay, number 7, big data, right? Amazing. It's about to be turned on its head. Here's the problem. Data is the new asset class, and all of you create this data. The virtual Raphael knows more about him than he does. Because you can't remember, what you said a year ago, what you bought a year ago, what diagnosis you had a year ago, what medication you took, what you got on your, Commerce 303 exam a year ago. He's leaving a trail of digital crumbs, and they get collected into a mirror image of him. The trouble is, the virtual you is not owned by you. It's owned by Facebook, governments, and big banks, and Google, and so on. That means that you can't use that data to plan your life, you can't monetize the data, and our privacy is being undermined. People at Davos this year, somebody said to me, "Come on, Don, privacy's dead. Get over it." This is ignorance. Privacy is the foundation of freedom, and we need to get our identities back. This constitutes our identity. We need to get them back so we can manage them ourselves in a responsible way and use this data to help us. So these big data frackers, fracking and oil and gas, they're collecting all this data. So what can we do? Well, there are projects underway to create the virtual you on a blockchain, and it's owned by you, and it's in a black box. And this virtual you is collecting all of this data for you, enabling you to use it for yourself. And that's a very exciting development. Finally, the new public sector. Most of you are not from government, so I'll be brief here. 3 opportunities. We can reduce the costs of government and have better quality government services with blockchain. So the Dubai government says it wants to be the first government in the world running fully on a blockchain. Estonia has a digital identity based on a blockchain, like I was describing. Then we have these new quasi-government opportunities. So a company called Viridium is partnering with a company called CarbonX. Full disclosure, I'm one of the founders. And we're going to tokenize carbon credits so that all of us will be trading carbon credits. And you go into the store and you have 2 toasters. There's the carbon neutral one and the old non-carbon neutral one, and the carbon neutral one comes with tokens. You're going to buy that one. Then you're going to have tokens. You can trade them. You can turn them into Reyes or Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything that you want. We can mobilize the whole planet and change human behavior. We have to do this because if we reduce carbon by 50%, by 80% in the year 2050, if we do that, it's a very hard thing to do. It'll take 1,000 years for the planet to cool down. And in the meantime, some bad things are going to happen.
But Trump don't believe in that.
Trump does not believe in that. I know. Well, Trump does not believe in science. He does not believe in the fourth estate, the media being a foundation of a free society. Don't get me going about Trump. Sorry, I'm going to stop myself right there. So this is very exciting. Number two, we can strengthen our democratic institutions. Do you have any problems of corruption in Brazil?
No, never.
Almost never.
It's all fake news.
It's all fake
It's
news.
a fake.
You know what? No country in the world is immune to corruption. And we have a crisis of democracy, a crisis of legitimacy. Trust is falling to all-time record lows. All around the world, young people agree with the bumper sticker. You know, you stick it on the bumper of your car. It says, "Don't vote." It only encourages them. This is not good. Democracy is the best system that we have. And if you look at the alternatives, you got in Brazil, I had a conversation with someone saying the alternatives in the election, you know, maybe large numbers of people would think it's better to have a military government. That would be a bad idea. So how are we going to save democracy? Well, all around the world there's this bifurcation between left and right, and that's what's behind Donald Trump and Brexit and all the anger that exists in the world today. And legitimacy is the idea. You may disagree with who is in government, but you think the system is the best system. We now have a president of the United States who says democracy doesn't work. It's all fake, and there's widespread corruption. All these black people are voting multiple times. We have a problem. So we need to move to a second era of democracy. This doesn't mean direct democracy. You know, vote every night on the evening news. That's a bad idea. That would be the digital mob. But we can build stronger representative institutions. How could we do that? Well, number one is e-voting. No one here will vote on a computer unless you have cryptographic proof that your vote can't be double counted or can't be moved to somebody else. Only blockchain can do that. But there are all these other things. These systems provide greater transparency. Do you know what the best antidote for corruption is? Transparency. Transparency is the best disinfectant. You see, because you make people naked, and if you're going to be naked, you know, fitness is no longer optional. You know, if you're going to be naked, you got to get buff, meaning you need to have good values, the values of integrity. So, but there are exciting other things. You could have your vote inside a smart contract so that the politician, for the vote to count, must execute the terms of the smart contract. Politicians accountable to citizens rather than to the big money that put them in power. What a crazy idea. So this is a very exciting time. Finally, central banks. You don't have to fear, if you're a central banker, don't fear Bitcoin. Embrace blockchain and put the Reyes, make it a cryptocurrency. That would give central bankers powerful tools. Imagine everybody, their money is on a mobile device or on some other kind of wallet. So these are three big opportunities. Okay, thank you. We did it. Now I'm not quite done yet because there are some impediments. Leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. So Jamie Dimon, I know he regrets it now, made this statement a month ago. He said, Bitcoin is a fraud. This reminds me of other statements I've heard over the years. Like Ken Olsen, the CEO of the second largest computer company in the world, Digital Equipment, said, there is no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. In English, we call these famous last words, before you die. So, how are we going to find the leadership for change? Well, this is a new paradigm. And when you get a new paradigm, it's a mental model. And paradigms put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. They're often based on assumptions that are so strong we don't even know that they're there. The Earth is at the center of the universe. That was a paradigm for thousands of years. Then Galileo came along and said, no, we're a planet. We rotate around the sun. Do you know how long it took the Catholic Church to exonerate Galileo? Galileo was excommunicated. He was exonerated 25 years ago. Pope John Paul, bless his heart, said, Galileo's right. The Earth is not the center of the universe. We rotate around the sun. We're a planet. That was 25 years ago. So, how is your company going to find the leadership for change? How is Brazil going to find the leadership for change? Well, my experience is leadership can come from the top, but that's rare. Leadership can come from anywhere. That means it's each of our personal opportunity. Because leadership is not the great visionary who sells a vision down. Lee Iacocca from Chrysler, the K car, Winston Churchill. No, leadership is leadership for learning. Show some curiosity. Get a Bitcoin wallet. It'll take you 3 minutes. Talk to Daria here. She'll do it for you in 2 minutes. On your mobile device, go buy a little bit of Bitcoin and go buy something. You'll learn more about public and private key cryptography in 2 minutes than if I talk to you all day long. Buy the book. Buy many, many copies of the book. I did a TED Talk, like 3 million people watched that on blockchain. Have a look at that. Also, get pilots going in your company. And if you're from a company that really wants to understand this, talk to Carl and join the Blockchain Research Institute. Can Brazil do this?
Yep.
Well, that's my attitude is the future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved. You have what it takes. You just have to find that leader within you to make this happen. So I'd like to end just, if I could, with an analogy. And, this is me and your Minister of Innovation, Vice Governor, signing the Blockchain Research Institute Act. And we'd love to have you being part of our collaboration. So let me end with an analogy. And Alex and I have been trying to understand trust. And we studied many organizations. We're now trying to learn something from nature. Fish come in schools, bees come in swarms, starlings over the moors of England come in something called a murmuration. And the murmuration refers, just a little muita sound, yeah. The murmuration refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. It's a word in the English dictionary. And starlings are out over a 20-mile radius throughout the day, and at night they come together. They create this spectacular thing. See that? That's a hawk. That's a predator 25 times the size of a starling. A killer of starlings being chased away by the collective power of the little birds. Now, scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. And there's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, magic happens. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could you learn something from it? Well, this is the trust protocol in nature. Remember I said trust is not achieved by an intermediary. There's no intermediary there. It's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code. The code is in the DNA of the birds. It gives it certain rules. The big one is don't bump into anybody else. But another rule is don't get too far away. It's a deep collaboration. There's a sharing of all kinds of information on this platform. And it has a great interdependence. Interdependence. You know, I say to CEO audiences that business can't succeed in a world that's failing. And if I was speaking to Donald Trump, I would say no country can succeed in a world that's failing. This murmuration functions as if the interests of the individual bird are connected to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. Interdependence. And it has a great integrity that enables birds to trust each other. What is trust? What is trust? It took me 3 months to say this in one sentence. Trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will do the right thing. And there are 3 values. That the other party will be honest, considerate of your interests, not just about themselves, and abide by their commitments, which is what gives a little bird the courage to take on a predator 25 times its size, because it knows that the other birds will act with integrity and have their back. I look at this, I get a lot of hope that maybe this new era of distributed trust will be one where the promise of the digital age is finally fulfilled. And maybe this more distributed world will be a world that our children inherit, which is actually a better one than what happened with the first era of the internet. So,
Thank you.
I'll be done. Thank you.